So welcome. Once again, my name is Pete Norlander, and I'm the director of the MS Human Resources and Employment Relations program at Loyola and an associate professor. I'm currently doing some research on remote work, and I'm very excited to have a guest with us today, Alenda Durr, who is an alumnus, and I'll tell you a little bit about her in a moment, who's been doing some incredible work in this area. But first, just for those who have not been here before, this is HR Insights, our monthly conversation about current issues in HR management. Next month's topic will be creating an equitable workplace for all, hosted by Professor Arup Varma. That will be November 3rd at noon. And for those of you who are attending for the first time, typically you are most welcome to, first of all, please do mute yourself, but feel free to turn your camera off if you're more comfortable that way. And just for your information, we do plan on recording this session. We are recording currently, and the recording may be used, we present the speaker mode, but used for being posted on the internet or other classroom purposes, for example. So we welcome questions in the chat. If you have questions during the talk today, please put it in the chat box and we will get to all the questions at the end. So it's going to be an interesting presentation today and discussion. Just enjoy, relax, and think of any questions you have and send them to me or put them in the chat box. So as I mentioned before, I'm delighted to have an alumnus with us today, Alenda Durr, to talk about the future of remote and hybrid work. So she's going to outline a major overhaul that she led at US Cellular. She's going to talk for about the first 20 minutes. And after her talk, I will describe some of the research I'm currently doing and ask some follow-up questions about her company's approach and the approach that they developed to remote work. So let me introduce our guest today. Alenda is a dynamic HR professional with over 25 years of sound HR experience mixed with a solid formal education, including at Loyola University's Masters of Human Resources program. She's currently leading diversity, equity, inclusion, and government compliance strategies at US Cellular Corporation, the nation's 4th largest wireless carrier. She is also actively involved in community as a servant and not-for-profit officer and board member. Her tagline on LinkedIn, which I really love, is solving problems you don't know you have in ways you will admire. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Alenda now to tell us about what she's been doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Oh my goodness, that was nice. I like the way you wrote that up. Thank you all for having me, and I'm really honored and humbled to share this time with you. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll share my screen here so that you can see what I am making reference to. And just let me know when you're able to see my screen.
Looks great.
Good deal. So let's go. All right. So as Peter mentioned, US Cellular is the 4th largest wireless services carrier, headquartered in Chicago with over 5.1 million customers, $4 billion in revenue, and over 5,000 associates across the United States. Our mission is to connect customers to the people and places that matter most to them. And our anchor is in being a dynamic organization that cultivates a setting where support, inclusivity, empowerment, and respect converge to create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. Our philosophy emphasizes the need to continually advance, improve, and succeed. And that's why once we recognized that our workforce was never going to be the same again, and that our service was more important than ever to those who rely on it, we aimed at navigating the unprecedented and unpredictable waters ahead of us with great intention. Before the pandemic hit and we went into lockdown in March 2020, US Cellular operated in a very traditional work model where our retail stores, field and network operations, and customer service centers, as well as our business centers, all worked on mostly on-site, mostly all the time. And we'd had a flexible work arrangement program for a number of years where an associate could request to work remotely 1 to 2 days a week. and it was subject to manager approval, considering the type of work done and the ability to do the work needed remotely. Well, the program wasn't available to our retail or our customer service associates, and it excluded our directors and above. Not many of our associates that were eligible took advantage of the program. Matter of fact, it was maybe about 20% of those that were eligible. And what we found is that there tended to be a strong distance bias in some areas of the organization around how work was expected to get done and where you should be when you were doing it. So being on site was the baseline expectation before the pandemic. In March 2020, though, we quickly transitioned to where about 40% of our workforce went involuntarily remote. And I know a number of you on the line understand exactly what I'm saying because you were in the same shoes that we were. That actually included our professional and technical workers, and we found a way for our customer support associates also from the care centers to get all-in-one communication devices. It kept them connected to our systems in order to service our customers while they were working from home. And that's something that we had never really envisioned would be necessary or that we would have to do. And we made it happen in a short period of time. Matter of fact, we had a number of our stores that were temporarily closed due to the rapid spread of the virus. And there were subsequent state mandates that we had to comply with. And, the whole while we continued to pay our retail associates from those stores. And some of them even assisted our customer service side of the house by making calls to customers to check in on them and make sure they had all that they needed during this really confusing time. So I was really proud of us being able to pivot so quickly to offer seamless support to our customers. And of course, when there were associates who didn't have reliable internet services, or if they had facility related jobs where they needed to be in the facility, the buildings were open for them to work under our new safety protocols. Well, we had already established a COVID task force to deal with the strategic and day-to-day management of the times. But we also knew that having a permanently 100% remote workforce that didn't have a place to touch base as a culture center, that it wouldn't be tenable for us. Because in the dynamic organization that we cultivate, there's value in face-to-face collaborative experiences. Our executives charged HR with identifying and implementing options for a new hybrid work model across our footprint, with associate well-being, business continuity, and performance in mind. Envisioning this new normal future of work required some really broad function collaboration and business partnerships to ensure that every key activity that could be impacted across the enterprise was evaluated. And once we did that, the project would continue to drive and monitor an integrated execution of this enterprise-wide change. So we knew we had to build the ship while it was sailing. And the work was assigned a project sponsor, and I was asked to be the business lead. So we put the scope together and accumulated an amazing team of leaders in the areas of HR business partnerships, employee relations, total rewards, talent strategies, learning and development, customer support, and so on. And we added other resources in key areas as we went along. We noticed that there were parallel future of work efforts happening and other functions like EH&S and IT and facilities. So a group of these project leads were brought together to govern those efforts centrally. And we branded the larger project Imagine Us. And it was a play on the word imagine and US with US Cellular. It became our job to take what many said could not be done pre-pandemic and to do it with thoughtfulness and excellence. Don't you like that? I just love that. So we had to get grounded in where we had come from, where we were and where we were attempting to go. Our original thought was that the pandemic would be over beginning of 2021 and we all had to be ready to execute in January. Well, little did we know. We changed our perspective from that, from executing during the post-pandemic mindset for implementation. And we began focusing on delivering a solution that would accommodate a more short-range way of operating based on what we were learning about our capabilities as we were building this ship. So we adapted an approach from Gartner to help build the business case for a hybrid workforce that considered the associate life cycle and full enablement from an organizational level. We asked ourselves questions like, what's the business case and strategy for creating, extending, expanding a hybrid workforce? And where and how do we invest in the employee life cycle for greatest returns on a hybrid workforce? We also asked, how do we ensure continuous improvement of our workforce in a hybrid model? Because we knew that answers to all of those questions were going to be tremendously important as we moved forward. Our aim was to adopt greater flexibility for our workforce in the most equitable way. And it was really important to look at the project charge through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we are representing everyone and wanted this model to be fair. We knew that we would have a more distributed workforce and that most associates would not be expected to work in a co-located way every day. Location had been a primary factor in how we performed and participated in work pre-pandemic. And it became clear that we were going to shift away from every job being resident on site all of the time and toward organizing our jobs along the spectrum of resident, revolving, and remote. That meant that some jobs would essentially need to be on site to perform their work, and that others could work off-site most of the time, if not all the time. There was a respective degree of inherent flexibility along that continuum, so we needed to know how making that change would impact how associates would experience work. There were 16 components of this Gartner framework in which we customized to our needs. We broke it apart and reorganized it for our function leaders and process owners to rebuild it in support of this new model. We shared it with talent acquisition, corporate communications, our onboarding teams, learning and development. I mean, you get the picture, what we did. We introduced the concept of a resident remote revolving flexible work model. And then we told them that as a major function or program owner in their respective space, we needed them to consider this lens when reviewing the major activities in their area and how the implementation of that model would impact their function or program outcomes. So we helped jumpstart the thinking by offering high-level activity assumptions in reference to each flexibility option, remote, revolving, and resident. And we offered 3 different exercises to help them along. One was a mind mapping exercise where you start with a central idea, then you branch out into activities and sub-activities that should be considered along the way. The second exercise was envisioning current state, future state, where the leader could identify activities that may require an additional support of investment of resources. And we also offered examples there of outcomes that this exercise could generate. The last exercise was a grid where they could provide the future-focused projects or work that was occurring in their areas. And we asked them to consider how they can partner with the project on delivering the best associate experience in our new normal. We shared this activity mapping worksheet, and I assigned one of our project resources to collect the information, follow up on key deliverables and timelines, and identify those points where a partnership with our project would be most appropriate, whether they would provide a resource to the project, offer a subject matter expert for support, or just give us a regular project update. And that yielded us some really good insight into what we needed to keep our eye on as we planned and neared launch of the new model. Concurrently, our total rewards team did an audit of all of our jobs, asking what type of work or tasks do associates do in their role, and where can the tasks be done most productively. So they were pretty much asking, where can the collaboration happen? Well, we wanted to determine the suitability of a job for flexibility in a hybrid workforce model. And our total rewards team evaluated work tasks with two main criteria in mind: the feasibility to deliver outcomes and the portability of the task. They reviewed the job descriptions and took the clearly agreed upon definitions of the tasks and outcomes and evaluated the interdependency on coworkers to achieve task outcomes in that definition. Those clearly defined tasks and outcomes enabled easier assessment of performance, irrespective of employees' work arrangements, and improved feasibility for employees to deliver outcomes. So tasks that were highly dependent on collaboration with other employees may be more likely to negatively impact performance when employees work flexibly. So we kept that in mind. And we considered the dependence of task completion on access to equipment and technology, and the portability of equipment for technology across work locations. For instance, if there was need for bulky equipment or location dependence of a requisite piece of technology, that would impede the portability of a task. So you kind of have an idea of how we went about that. The outcome of this audit was that each job was designated either resident, revolving, or remote. And the designation was indicated on each job description. So we decided to tag the job and not the associate because it's easier to plan for facility space and to measure improvements and impacts of the model itself when making these designations. So while making these assignments, the primary needs of the business outweighed the needs of the job incumbent. So there may be jobs classified as one thing, but because of an associate's performance or their unsuitable remote workspace or whatever may be, they may work outside of that designation, so to speak, and HR keeps track of those exceptions. Now we talk about revolving, and revolving is a range of options where leaders can determine how associates are asked to be on site. And the project team originally started with the idea of 1 to 2 days or 2 to 3 days a week on site for revolving. We then went to the officer teams. Division leaders then determined how jobs would be assigned within their respective business groups. So they took that audit information, the job audit information, and they determined how these designations would work within their groups. It was acknowledged that associates need full enablement, whether they're on-site or working remotely. So technology and connectivity was a key factor in assuring that that would happen. Our officers had also already made the call that hiring for our roles will remain within our footprint or the locations in which we operate, with very, very few exceptions. And working remote from anywhere was out of scope for us. There's more work to go into that particular designation of remote anywhere. Well, our leaders told us how much they expected their teams would use the facilities, from meeting room space and individual desks. We called them we space and me space. And facilities was actually able to take this information that we gathered and factor it all into the design of our new workspaces, because we knew we were not going to be able to use it the same anymore. We needed to make the best of how it was laid out to fit everyone's needs for each individual and each team and each group and each department when they would need it, because not everyone was expected to be co-located at one time anymore. So when we received the responses back from the officer team and their divisions in April of this year, it was really clear that we'd learned a lot about how well we'd been able to move within the interim state that we were in and be productive. We realized that our approach didn't need to be about being in the office on this day or that day. It became more about how to enable collaboration for our associates, whether they were on site or off site. because our culture was still strong and it was due to our ability to collaborate well. So we began to focus on creating a thoughtful on-site experience for each associate where on-site time would be intentional and the office would become a culture space designated to provide a social anchor, serve as a learning space, and operate as a collaboration hub. So in June, we offered the opportunity for those who wanted to return to our business centers and call centers because it looked like we were coming out of the woods on this pandemic. Well, so volunteers were allowed to work on site for 2 days a week, and that's 2 days that they would choose. And we were able to gather feedback and insights from them to inform us on how we would construct our workspaces, how we would enable work through technology and equipment. And the change management arm of the work recruited about 40 or so change champions, is what we called them. These were associates who work in non-retail settings and at all levels of the company. And they were volunteers, some were non-volunteers, and they served as the boots on the ground voices for us. They talked with their colleagues to find out things like what it would take for them to feel comfortable coming back to the office, what they liked, what they didn't like about working from home, and other questions that would help us understand the internal waters that we were navigating. That feedback helped us continue refining the hybrid work model launch plan. And we planned again to return in August, but that's just when infections were resurging again. So we've communicated to our associates that we won't return before the beginning of 2022 and that there will be at least 1 month's notice. That keeps people from being anxious about what's next to happen. And we also communicated about the recent vaccine mandate from the White House. We continue to strongly encourage vaccines as we go, and we're preparing for whatever guidance we receive from OSHA at this point. So until the infection rates decline and we feel that we can be in our facility safely, we're pausing with full implementation of the model. There's still a governance team in place to facilitate our decision making, and we still continue to monitor the situation. So here, I'll give you a look at what we have landed on with our job designations. You'll see here how the resident, remote, and revolving are broken out. Resident is, in essence, divided up into our resident jobs that are in store, like our retail sales consultants and our store managers, and then our in office, like our facility roles. Maybe 2% of our non-retail roles are designated as remote. And that I'll call out here is that the remote jobs may need to be on site from time to time. So from an all hands meeting or to network with colleagues, which is one of the reasons why we do not have a remote anywhere option. We're still asking for everyone to still be within our business footprint. The last column, revolving, is our largest designation. And like I said earlier, these associates will have a purpose for being on site. If it's better for them to do heads down work at home, that's where they can do it. If there's a group of colleagues who need to meet on a project to whiteboard ideas or respond to a crisis, they can do that on site. So that's in essence what we're looking at attempting to do. And our CEO wrote a very engaging article on LinkedIn about our philosophy and how this would all play out. He's been a tremendously supportive voice for this work, and I encourage you all to check it out. I'll make sure that we have the link put into the chat here before we're done. Matter of fact, when we want our leaders to understand how all of this would work, we made it a point of doing what we could to bring this to life. And we created a day in the life for how it would look when designations were actually at play and we were working within them. And this is an idea of what we put together so that we could create that picture, create that vision, and people could begin to see themselves in the particular designations that we were offering. It was imperative that we prepare everyone for this shift, which would be tectonic for some who were really grounded in the traditional way of working. So we developed leader and associate toolkits that offered perspective and resources to support the change. Things like team agreement templates and how to consider performance management when team members were remote. So for associates, we wanted to help them with planning of when to be on site. So we offered a decision-making framework that laid out the benefits and the risks of balancing meeting the needs of the business, the team, and the associate work-life balance. So we even developed 3 interactive and self-paced LMS courses that introduced the model itself. They offered resources and skills on coaching and collaboration within the model. And all of these resources are accessible on our internal webpage dedicated to this effort. And we couldn't leave out our HR community, who will be the backbone of this effort. They receive weekly updates on the project's progress. They receive advanced access to all of the resources, and they keep us connected to the leaders and the associates alike. We created a Teams page for us to use as a communication vehicle and we offer them as much support as they need to be successful with this. So as expected, their role will be key to the success of this effort. And with all of that being said, I'm thinking I've covered as much as I can at this point. I'm going to pass it over to Peter so that he can move on with the next part of our presentation.
Wow, thank you. I love the rich details that you presented and that journey of transformation. It sounds like an incredible amount of work. And I want to go ahead and share a little bit about my research, and then in about 12 minutes, let's go to questions that either can come in from the chat, or those of you who during registration let me know what your organization is doing. I want to bounce those ideas off with Alenda, because she's obviously thought in great detail about the pros and cons and has seen many different models that can be used. So for what my research is currently looking at, I just want to just a moment. So it was a question, and the question I have is where are things going to go given where we've been? So the Bureau of Labor Statistics started surveying in May of 2020, and that was, a few months after the pandemic began, forced remote for as many workers who could work remotely. It was about 38% in the United States at its peak. And if you look at what has happened since then, okay, a year later, we were down to 18% in May 2021 and below 15% in July 2021. So this actually compares very similar to, the Bureau of Labor Statistics had done these surveys of every few years and not seen a whole lot of change, even going back to around 1997 in terms of the percentage of Americans who work from home or are able to work from home in the prior month. So I guess one question I have for you, Alenda, is just what do you think is involved with the rush to return back to the office? What are some of the pressures?
I would say the first thing that comes to mind is the fear that we are going to lose our connection, our culture, the fear that organizations need to have that in-person connection in order to really collaborate well, in order to really deliver on business imperatives. And a lot of what we do is social. There is a great part of being able to stop over at your colleague's desk and say, hey, you know what, let me run this by you because I have something I'm trying to figure out and I just can't quite get to it. Or, there's something to that water cooler conversation, or being able to just kind of stretch out after coming from a long meeting and having some non-business related conversation with your colleagues. But one of the things that I'm finding is that we're figuring out how to do that in the digital age. We're figuring out how to make cool down time with one another. We don't have a problem pinging one another when we need to talk with them, which is the equivalent of stopping by someone's desk. At the same time, when you need to make sure that you're protecting your time, we are finding ways of doing so as well. Good partner announcements to say, I'm unable to respond to your emails during this time, or I'm on focus time, however, whatever platform you're using. And I think that the biggest issue is just a fear that we're going to move away from the culture that gives us that secret sauce and makes us that unique organization that everyone wants to be a part of. And because I can't say that it's productivity, most
Hmm.
employees are saying that their productivity is through the roof, their performance is through the roof, the business performance is through the roof. And that's really the biggest thing I think I would say. That's where the pressure comes from, other than the fact that there was already a bias towards being co-located and in the same location. We really didn't, we were afraid of what we didn't know could happen with the remote space. And many companies, just like ours, were doing work remotely because you had team members who were scattered all around the globe or all around the United States, and they were finding ways of connecting to each other on those dreaded telecom calls. So we were finding a way to make it happen. I think we just need to kind of move out of our way and understand that culture doesn't necessarily live in a space. It lives in the way that we collaborate with one another.
Thank you. Um, one thing that I have been thinking about with that. So this is the slide that shows the percentage of Americans who say that they've worked from home in the last month. And we think a lot, like you said, before the pandemic, what was happening? Well, we were in an era of globalization, and workers could be anywhere in the world many times. And some of what enables people to work remotely productively, like you talked about, it's the capabilities and including training workers on how to productively work remotely and how to have language around things like focus time and not knowing not to schedule back-to-back meetings. So what I'm trying to do, and I'm just showing this up here, what you saw in the last slide, if I can go back, is just May 2020 through July 2021. I'm trying to build a data set that is going to look at 2014 at least through 2021. And this is in the red line on the right, there's the straight up and down line. That's March 2020. That's the beginning of COVID. And then the bright red line is that Bureau of Labor Statistics data. That's the only continuous, we would call it a time series, of how many Americans can work from home. What I'm trying to do is build a data set that has, what do employers say in their job advertisements about where people can work. So like, I really enjoyed the, remote, revolving, resident. The language in the job ad sometimes indicates whether a job can be done remotely. So this is a time series going back in time, what can be done remotely. And I'm trying to build a time series of that. And, one of the questions I have, when thinking about that is you were talking about how before it was really at manager's discretion, right? And I see a lot of that in the job ads. It's possible, you may, some of these wiggle words where it's not clear how much can a person work from home or remotely versus how much you have to be on site. That raises for me, and I'm sure you saw it, like a lot of equity issues. Where did you see differences between how female or male managers handled that, or at different levels of the hierarchy? There was more bias about having workers distant if they were at different levels in terms of education, gender of managers, other types of features. What do you think about that in the before time, and how do you make it more equitable?
That's a great question. There's still a lot of experiential knowledge happening around that right now, and I can only share what my perspective is, and based on what I've seen, I wouldn't necessarily say that the male or female managers approach the issue differently as employees, but as humans, they did. Because we may have seen different levels of responsibility or prioritization with how life was happening at the same time. And I know you've probably seen a lot about women leaving the workforce because there was a need to choose whether or not they could balance that work life, um, uh, the work and the life that was put right in front of them during this time. So quite honestly, I think just because of the roles that we play outside of work, yeah, there was a difference. I think that also was the case when it came to, African Americans and when it came to Hispanics and Latinos. I think that it was definitely the case when you talked about those who were in the disability space. Um, uh, and actually, what I hear is that for those who are disabled, working from home and working remotely actually worked better for them. So, there's a scale of up and down for who um, was impacted by this change. And so you have to take all of that into consideration when you're looking at how can you make that work more equitable. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure to do is address what those power dynamics could be when you're in the workplace. There's one thing when you're used to being seen by your leader or your coworkers, and that might have been one of the ways that you got certain work or were assigned to certain projects or stayed in the know about things that were happening. And there was a feeling that if you were working from home or if you were working remotely or if you were not in the same place as most of your team, you would not get access to those same opportunities because you wouldn't be having those offhand conversations or being as social with those people. And we thought about that. We thought about how visibility and access is a major component, are two major components of the power dynamics that are at play. Seeing your boss in the elevator is something that is, rather informal, and you striking up that conversation is a whole lot easier than trying to find time on their calendar and making sure that so we took that into consideration and we gave coaching and resources on how to manage those power dynamics, how to think about approaching these issues a little bit differently so that we can kind of level out those differences and make it more equitable for everyone involved. And I'm pretty sure I have some of my team members on the call here today. If I'm leaving anything out, or if you can, think of something that we've done specifically that you'd like to share, do not hesitate to share.
Thank you. I would love to hear from anyone who can share their experience on that. Just a couple more things I'm thinking about in my research, and I just enjoy, and I'm really appreciating hearing your perspective on this too. One thing that came up was this idea that there's a potential maximum or theoretical, based on tasks, these workers have so much interdependence they need to be on site this many days a week, or they have such job duties that they are required to be in person. So this is a chart that someone else created with the average wage of an occupation in an industry and the percentage of jobs in that industry that can be done remotely. So it says, for example, restaurants, very low percentage of jobs can be done remote, and wages tend to be low. But at the top right here, computer systems analysts, a lot of it can be done remotely in theory. And when you look at the earnings inequality, it seems like that higher earning workers are more likely to be able to work from home. But one thing I just am not sure about is just because something can be done remote doesn't mean it will be done remote. And that's where all of the work that you've done, pulling together these agreements and making people come together. This is the point I want to get across to other academics who are researching this. It's not just theoretically what can be done. It is, we still have to talk and deal with people to make plans and arrangements, because ultimately we're dealing with people's understandings of themselves, their jobs, their team. If they feel like there's inequity, even on, I only get to work this many days, or I don't get to work from home, but my coworker does, it can create a lot of conflict. And that's where I'm developing, and I want to go back in time and look at this, how much do these things matter? Like the amount of capability a worker has, social contracts and understandings that people have of work. And I'm sorry, I'm putting a lot of words up here on the slides. I actually want to maybe get off my slides and just ask you, and then we'll move into questions from everyone. How do you address conflict and these the change management piece of this, where people's understandings of themselves, their jobs, their team just are different.
I believe we tried our best to approach this from as balanced of a perspective as we could. And I mentioned a little bit earlier how we created a decision matrix where if you have to decide where it's best for you to do your work, take into consideration the needs of the business, the needs of the team that you're supporting and your clients, and then also the needs of yourself from a work-life balance perspective. And we want people to understand the risks of overdoing it in one area or the other, and we want people to understand how to really just kind of level out where they are best. They're able to give their best. So we offer tools. We also know that our leaders are going to be a large influence on the types of decisions that are made. And we need to make sure that they're understanding that flexibility in this is really what's going to help people navigate that change. Um, and, not flexible to the point that performance becomes an issue, but flexible to the point that it's okay to go, log off, go pick up your children, and come back home and, spend a couple of hours after you've gotten everyone settled at home. It's okay to spend a couple more hours online. It's not the type of thing where we expect you to, sit in that seat for 8 hours a day in front of the computer. We know that flexibility is key. And sometimes it requires more competence in learning how to navigate those power dynamics, as I mentioned before, learning how to, um, you know, uh, make it a point to have the conversations with your employees so that they will know, where they stand, where you stand. We put out a resource that's team agreements so that each individual on the team had a chance to weigh into how they would organize the schedule, how they would organize when a person is in the office, when the team comes into the office, make sure that they're in alignment with their leader and their leader's leader and their leader's leader, because it's all a trickle down effect there. So we know that navigating this particular change is one that has an impact on a person's job, but communication and flexibility are the two things that I think are really important for there to be an open communication loop between the leader and their associate.
Thank you. So I now want to open up for questions. So please put questions in the chat. I want to first go to what came in from those who registered in advance. This is kind of going to be a rapid round of, we had asked people to name practices that they were doing in their organization, or ones that you've heard about that are interesting. So I want to just go through some of those with you now and ask your thoughts on them, because it seems like your approach is not one size fits all, but you've seen, you've worked with a lot of different managers and different types of systems. So here's one right here. Our company offers 129 remote days and employees can decide how to use them.
Nice.
Pros, cons, risks. I mean, none of these are going to be perfect for every situation, but what would you think if you heard that?
I'm thinking that company has done, they've looked at this as a measure of the employee determining their own flexibility around this, giving them the responsibility of managing a bank of days. I mean, it's just like PTO, paid time off, making sure that there's enough time for you to flex your time as needed. And it makes the employee responsible for their own destiny, so to speak. So I like that idea. I can see it being a bit of a risk because honestly, some people may need a little bit more than that time. And really, to me, it's about being able to have a conversation with your leader, have an agreement on what your work style is, your work approach, having all of your deliverables, outlined so that there's no question when it comes to managing the performance and managing the progress of what you're doing. I think that that part needs to be shored up in order to make sure that that kind of an approach works.
Great. One company is now only allowing remote as an option for those workers with chronic illnesses and other disabilities that require accommodations. So you mentioned before that this has, from the disability community, you've heard work better for them. And I mean, I hear this and I think, well, they're meeting the legal standard, but what's your sense of the pros, cons, risks with that approach?
Well, I think that it's amazing that they are looking to provide those accommodations for those who, are having a difficult time adjusting and accommodating to being in the office all the time a based on a disability. And quite honestly, the that to me is a pro. They're not just necessarily meeting a minimum standard of government expectation, but they're doing what they need to do to take care of their people who really need it. I could say the cons of that would be that there are a number of other employees in the company who may not necessarily fall into that category, who they also need options. And I think that not providing options for people who may not, have a disability or a condition that limits their ability to do the job, I think that they're probably risking disengagement at some point because there are so many other companies out here who are offering that flexibility, offering those different options. And we're in what's being called the Great Resignation now. So if someone finds an opportunity and their talent is valuable to one of those organizations who have those options, it's very possible that they could lose people.
Hmm. Another idea that came in was for synchronized hybrid. The team is in the office 2 days together. I'm sorry, 3 days together, and then they're at home separate 2 days. How does that sound?
I think that really underscores the importance of collaboration. It underscores the importance of communicating because when you're with your team, whether or not you are able to, reach them on site, how to reach them in a remote capacity. One of the things we also did was when we had our leaders look at when they wanted to most use the facilities, we also had them consider what groups do you usually interact with. So we know that HR is in essence a shared service where we are supporting all of the other functions and divisions. But who are we working with most of the time? And take that into consideration to understand when you actually need to be in a collaborative space with them. So I like that idea. I think that that could work for organizations. Depending on the size of the groups, depending on the size of the employees. But yeah, I think that could work.
All right. What about the mandatory day? So Tuesdays, we're all going to be in the office, or Wednesdays, or whatever day of the week.
We intentionally moved away from that particular model because we realized that having a set day to be in the office really didn't have very much intention behind it other than the whole butts and seats idea that they talk about from a facility standpoint. And that didn't give us what we thought would be useful, but it may work for a different organization. I think that if everything is planned out and people understand what's needed and they can get in there and do their work and connect with the services that they need, connect with their partners, do all that they need to do while they're there, and that it's not necessarily that heads down type of work where you're in your computer all day, because you can do that at home, right? So as long as an employee is able to plan that time to be in the space and utilizing that time, leveraging the fact that there are others in the space at the same time, it could work for some organizations.
All right, here's another one. We are going back to the office 100%.
100% all the time, every day.
That's what's coming up for someone who reported on what's happening in their workplace.
Uh, and to be honest with you, there's a lot of organizations that are, if they're not already there, they're planning to get there in more of a post-pandemic space. And you know, that may be what that organization needs. I can't necessarily speak to how their culture, um, works if they're not there 100% of the time. I don't know if they're in the retail space or, manufacturing. I don't quite know the context around it. But what I would say is those who have transferable skills, and in the professional and technical space, I mean, the market is hot. And if they don't want to be at a company where they have to be there every day, all day, quite honestly, there's a lot of options out there for them. And I think organizations really need to consider that when they're making these plans to move forward. That's why I really love the fact that our CEO put that piece out about being on site, on purpose, for purpose.
Very good. One idea that actually came from a student's paper. This was during the pandemic. A student was writing a paper on the remote work potential for U.S. workers if, for example, the government required, for some reason, reasonable accommodations for remote work for, let's say, a worker who is pregnant or a new parent. Do you think on the regulation front, have you heard of anything coming out at a local, state, or federal level that might change workers' entitlement to working remotely?
The only thing that I've heard, not so much, well, I mean, of course, we have this executive order that everyone in corporate is making sure that they're paying attention to and how to implement. Still waiting for guidance on that. But I'm not sure I've heard of anything on the federal level, although on the state level, there are states that will most likely progress into that kind of a policy. I think that's a wait and see.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we do have a question in the chat box, and for other people who have questions, please put them in the chat box, or if you would like to raise your hand, go ahead. But for Mika, she asked, a company may be able to keep employees engaged and satisfied with remote work, but how is productivity going to be measured and assessed?
I believe in the same way it always has. I don't think that it's going to be very much different, other than the fact that we have to take into consideration some managers are uncomfortable with managing remotely, and some employees are uncomfortable with working remotely. So when you factor that in, knowing that there's a certain amount of work that just needs to get done for the company to keep the lights on and stay afloat and be profitable, um, we're going to measure it the same ways as we have before. There's our, we have stay interviews, we have exit interviews. We also have our engagement survey that takes a good litmus of our culture. Um, we really wanted to try and get in, US Cellular wanted to try and get into our engagement survey this year with a few points around the hybrid work model, but the timing just didn't work out for us. But we're definitely eyeing it for next year, because we'll have an opportunity to hopefully get into the model and work through some different options about what's working for us, tweak what doesn't, and get that feedback next time that we do our corporate survey, because that's one of the biggest places that our associates give us their raw, uncut, pure, unmitigated feedback. And we have great engagement. As a matter of fact, we just received the engagement scores back from this year, and we had 89%, I believe, respond. So it was amazing to see just that our associates, number one, don't mind responding, and number two, telling us how they really see things.
Yeah, great.
Hey, Alenda, can I add on to your answer? This is Denise. Your
Absolutely.
culture survey, like, I know we didn't have any specific questions about, return to office and all that in the culture survey, but we did get a lot of comments, and the comments were about the flexibility we're providing, and the company felt really well informed of what we were doing. So I'm going to take that as a big celebration, because the comments, that means they had to take the time to write it and get it in there, while there wasn't a specific question. There was a lot of comments about very specific situations, but that's different. That's a one-on-one thing. So just want to add on to your great answer.
Yeah, and that's really important that they took that time to do that. And for everyone, Denise is actually the leader of our governance team of Imagine Us. So I'm so glad you could join us today.
Yeah, I couldn't wait. This is exciting.
Thank you. There's another question here from Diane about why has remote work not changed much over the last decade? And even now it seems to be going back to where it was. One thing I've been thinking about is, that question of what can be done remote. We discovered during the pandemic that a lot more things could be done remote. Like, I love the example that you gave of the technicians being able to actually support customers from a distance. And I saw it at, even the restaurant industry when Chick-fil-A put workers on FaceTime and iPads at the, drive-through. And you don't have to physically be there. It turns out you can change the work and you can do it, but why didn't we do that before? And even now, why are we going back to the ways things had been done? It's a tough question, but old habits die hard. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons that we aren't making that change permanently. And some companies are going back 100%. Old habits die hard. There's that. And then, the fact that we don't want for people to say our culture is dead or changing to the point that it begins to affect our bottom line. So I get it. I totally get it. But I think that we have to somewhat take a little bit of a risk in not necessarily big risks, but calculated, educated and informed risks as we move forward with this thing, because we never know where we're going to land. We don't know when we're all going to be back to whatever this new normal is supposed to be. So we're still taking calculated risks, and we're actually doing a pretty decent job with it. So that's a learning.
Yeah, and I think all of the supportive infrastructure that you described is not something that every company has thought through very well. And to imagine that, you can do remote or hybrid well without having that supportive, learning management system and training for managers, training for employees, frameworks for decision making, all of that infrastructure, that's critical, I imagine, to success.
Yeah. It is.
Well, thank you for telling us about what you've been doing, and really learning from you has been a real pleasure. I do want to thank everyone who joined us today. Let's give a round of applause to our guest. And thank you so much, Alenda, for being here. To finish up today, I just wanted to remind everyone to please come next month when Professor Varma will be hosting on November 3rd, Creating an Equitable Workplace for All at noon. We hopefully will have this up on the web at some point. You can watch it, or if you enjoyed it, you can send it to a colleague. But for those of you who could not make last month's talk on encouraging innovation, I just posted that into the chat box as well. I also put in the chat box earlier, Alenda had mentioned a LinkedIn post from the CEO. That's up there if you'd like to see that. And with this, thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.